Hello, everyone, and welcome to Getting Started with TypeScript. In today's workshop, we're going to understand what is TypeScript, why do we use it. We're going to set up our environment on actually how to effectively work with TypeScript, and then lastly, actually start writing with TypeScript because that's really the fun of it all. It's been a while since the last stream that I had, so it's good to be back. Of course, having camera issues is a part of the stream, but also thank you for joining us if you're coming to us after we go live here on the recording. But welcome to Beginning with TypeScript or Getting Started with TypeScript. Uh, so my name is Korey Stegared-Pace. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And unlike some people in the world, I actually do love a bit of TypeScript. I'll tell you why, and why I think some people aren't the biggest fans of it. But we will dive deep into really kind of getting our hands on TypeScript and really what are we going to do when we want to actually implement it into our projects. So we have a quick agenda. So first, I'm going to answer why TypeScript. Uh, some people might feel like that TypeScript or JavaScript was enough. Why do we need to now also have an additional language, if you will, or something above JavaScript to work with? Then we're actually going to set up TypeScript. So getting your environment ready so you can actually start writing it. And then lastly, we're going to look at some of the syntax of writing TypeScript and really some of the value of writing TypeScript, which is sometimes making mistakes and finding out what the problem is. So first, are you ready to learn some TypeScript? I want to know in the chat, one, where you're joining from. Also, I see some people from, let's see, we got Long Island here. That's lovely. Italy, Nigeria. So good global audience. I love it. But also tell me, what's your JavaScript experience? If you're just kind of beginning your JavaScript journey, hopefully you know some JavaScript. It's kind of hard to start from very beginning working with TypeScript. So having some base JavaScript knowledge is good. So let us know where you're joining from and also your JavaScript knowledge. And answering the question, are you actually ready to learn some JavaScript, some TypeScript? Maybe this is something on your New Year's resolution or something, I don't know, and you're really wanting to learn this. And it's now 2023 is the year you learn TypeScript. So I'm glad to be there. So let's get some JavaScript knowledge, very low. Functional style JavaScript, I love it. Thank you. Intermediate level, perfect. So good basis for everything. And like I said, we're going to write some TypeScript and really get an understanding of what's the difference between them. Because I think a lot of times people, when they start learning or looking at TypeScript, they're like, well, I'm still learning JavaScript, or I haven't mastered JavaScript, so maybe I don't want to add an additional language. But I'll show you why that's not necessarily the case. And perfect. It's TypeScript, a case-sensitive language. Lovely. I like that as well. So sometimes I mix these things up. So thank you for pointing that one out. And yes, so someone's ready to learn TypeScript. So let's get into it then, huh? So why TypeScript? Well, first we have to look at it as you saw the birth of actual JavaScript, which happened in 1995 by this man on the left here. This is purposely sort of pixelated. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guess who that person is. Hopefully some of you know this man who, let's say, invented JavaScript. His name is Brendan Eich. And how long did it take him to make JavaScript? This is going to be a quiz for everyone. Whoever gets the right answer will get a digital handshake from me, which is high value on the digital market, if you will. But yeah, let me hear some guesses. How long did it take Brendan Eich to make JavaScript? 2 weeks. Okay, like that. And obviously, you have Google completely available for you. So, maybe this is pretty easy answer if you're quick. So everyone says 2 weeks, but yeah, the correct answer is indeed 10 days. So if we think about it, one, the web has changed since 1995. Making an entire web language in 10 days is quite the feat. But how we sort of adapt to working on the web, how we write the code, the teams, the sophistication of our web applications, all are going to be has changed. So the language and our approach needs to also change as well. And while JavaScript has changed, we have ES6 now. And in the cases of actually the language, some of the core parts of the language hasn't really changed, and that's kind of why we have TypeScript in general. Because I mean, I'm not here to bash JavaScript. This is not going to be one of those talks where we look at all the weird things JavaScript does. But JavaScript is a bit weird, especially if you come from a different programming language, and how it handles it, different types, variables, the way you actually write the code. It's different to other languages out there, and especially when we have other developers coming into that working with JavaScript, it can be, not to say frustrating, but weird. And the classic example of this is like, if you're taking, in this case, a number, 2, and you're adding it to 2, which is in a string format, you're going to get this 22. And, some languages would say that's not cool. And in JavaScript, doesn't really care. And this is a very simple example, of course, but when we get into more sophistication of your applications, this can cause some serious problems, or at least frustration as a developer. So I love this right here. Can we learn TypeScript in 10 days? I'll settle for that. I won't put a limit on your amount of speed of learning, but I think you should definitely dig deep into TypeScript, and we'll see how fast you go. But also, when we talk about JavaScript not caring, JavaScript, I think, equals freedom. Because again, as a developer, you can write in different order of the code. You don't really have to stress as far as having a compiler that maybe is throwing you errors. And again, that's, I think, why it's attractive as a language is actually going to that freedom that you have. And sadly, as we say in the world, freedom, it isn't free, right? So there's some cost to this. Where if you think the code is running okay, you launch it or you launch your application, you'll get different errors, like type errors, things that are undefined, things are being read, or uncaught, or the properties aren't defined, and that can be very frustrating as a developer, because again, every time that you're running code, and maybe you're one of those people like me who do like the console.log throughout their whole entire application to find out where things are breaking. Let me know if you've ever written console.log to save your application, because hey, it works, but maybe it's not the best way to write JavaScript. So people were interested. Again, a lot of developers coming from different areas, different languages, and they want to find a better way to write JavaScript. And TypeScript is born from a little small company called Microsoft. I'm not sure if you've heard of them at all. Console.log saved the world. I love that. So first TypeScript was actually developed as an internal tool for developers in Microsoft to write better JavaScript, or write it in a more efficient way, or precise way, if you will. And then that was in the early 2010s, and then it was actually released open source into 2012. Funny thing is, I, as a Microsoft employee, did not know Microsoft had made TypeScript when I first started learning. So that's a bit of history, not very important, but good thing to know, just in case if you have some sort of weird JavaScript trivia coming up. I don't know. So one of the questions that we always get is TypeScript still JavaScript? And is TypeScript a different language in itself, or are we learning a new programming language? And to me, I'm going to take a sideline on this debate and say it is whatever you feel it is, if it's a different language or not. So many people think it is. You're trying to learn a new language, a new programming language, but in its essence, or in its core, TypeScript or JavaScript, basically TypeScript gives you everything in JavaScript and more. And is working specifically with types, which we will see later on how things are going with that. Yes, so yeah, but 2 + 2 = 4. I love it. So love the interaction in the chat, and if you do have any questions, I'm monitoring as well when we get into the depths of things like that. So the next thing, what makes TypeScript unique is its type system, or what we call static typing. So this is actually working and understanding the types that you're working on. We'll look at what exactly a type is, checking if you're working with them correctly, and if not, it actually throws an error or a message. And it's really odd. Some people will say like, "Well, TypeScript will scream at you or it'll yell at you," and I think those are the people trying to scare people away from TypeScript, but it will give you an error in your IDE so that you can fix it. So again, when you're trying to compile your code or run your code, instead of waiting for those errors to come in your lovely Google Chrome console or whatnot, you can get ahead of it. And I think if we talk about thinking in TypeScript, that's really around, again, safety or type safety, or around actually working with JavaScript very efficiently. So what are types? So you're probably, again, since we have a mixed bag of experience in JavaScript, you're probably familiar with these sorts of types in JavaScript. So we have strings, the quotation marks, numbers, booleans, true, false, arrays, which can be, group of things, functions, and objects. These are familiar faces that you have in JavaScript. But like I said, TypeScript gives us these things, but also a little bit more of that. And they actually introduce different types. And I love the TypeScript documentation on this because they call them everyday types, which is kind of like things that we also are working with there. And we have, some people throwing out some types. What is your favorite type? I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that's exactly what you're working with. But then in TypeScript, we also have some new types that we can work with. Ones are called unions, type aliases, which is kind of, I think, one of the coolest parts of TypeScript, which is actually working. You can actually make your own types, essentially. Interfaces, tuples, and enums. So we're going to look at those in more in depth on actually what those look like, the syntax in them, and how TypeScript in the IDE actually functions. And again, this is my last philosophical point before we actually get into the code and get into the setup. But I think if you really want to understand why we use TypeScript, is really about managing expectations. So knowing what you're trying to do in the code, what your functions are doing, how you're getting or setting something, your methods, managing those expectations of actually making sure that they do what you set out for them to do. And that happens, if you're working on a solo project, that's much easier to do because it's only you writing the code. But let's say you're working with a team and people change things around, and things, make people making commits or changing variable names or variable types. That could be a huge problem. And in vanilla JavaScript, if you will, basically the same JavaScript that you're code writing, it doesn't necessarily flag those as errors in most of the cases. So when we talk about the type system, it is around, and we'll visually see this later on in the IDE, is around kind of flagging these problems before they actually occur. So we're compiling this code, which is probably, if you don't come from any other programming language, a unique experience in JavaScript, but also giving us that vital information on how to fix that. Sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not, but we'll talk about some of the benefits and not so cool benefits of that. But yes, TypeScript in the middle, hashtag Malcolm in the middle. One of my favorite shows, by the way. Cool. So what are some of the benefits of actually using TypeScript? Why we are trying to do this? Well, one, I would say there's less errors, and I'm not making any promises that you have no errors. And I'm not going to say that TypeScript is going to help you lose 10 pounds or have clearer skin. It's not going to solve the world's problems or world hunger, but it is going to allow you to have less errors in your code when you're actually compiling the code and releasing that code or application that you're working with. It actually makes you way more efficient as a developer. I will, when I'm showing my code, also have GitHub Copilot running. So that's a kind of a warning there. So you'll probably see some suggestions from GitHub Copilot as well. But also built into TypeScript is suggestions or also making sure if for example, if you're making a spelling mistake or something like this, that you for a variable or something like that or method, it makes those suggestions on what you should be doing. And then ultimately, I think it's just a better developer experience. It can be frustrating at times, and I think a lot of times people throw away TypeScript because of that. But ultimately, once you get used to the error messages and understand what they mean, it's a better experience for you as a developer as far as making sure that when you're writing efficient code and that's less error prone. So there's a few ways that it does this. So like I said, the compiler, so it's actually running the code before you actually have this in an application or anything like that, so you can see the errors. The type checker is essentially again making sure that you are use the expected type that is being declared or returned is in fact the type that is going to be set to. So it's running through your code and finding that stuff. There's some auto suggestions, which again is something that everyone loves, and in types and tooling as well. So let's say if you're importing a library, Express or something like that, you can actually pull in those particular types as well. Again, making you a lot of saving you a lot of time for that. Let's see. We have one question or a little debate point. Let's see. So I read a study which determined that developers spend more time writing TypeScript than they save because of having TypeScript in their project, though. How is that efficient? That's a really good question, because that's a really good point. So a lot of times you actually write more code when you're working with TypeScript, but I don't think more code necessarily is a time suck or a time using time more. Because if you write just vanilla JavaScript and you're trying to debug an issue for hours on end, that is another that's a bigger time waste than if I'm writing more code and it's efficient code that I know is actually going to work because of the type checker and the compiler. So I think that's the difference. So yeah, you might be writing more code, and if you're starting out in TypeScript, it might be a bit harder to adjust to. But like that old saying of like what is it, like measure twice, cut once. Yeah, that's I would say that's what TypeScript is. So that's the kind of mentality you should approach TypeScript in being. Cool. Yeah, it's about the quality of code. Good point. Uh, cool. And so these are, like I said, not so great points, which also were brought up in the chat. Yeah, it does take some time. Take some time to maybe get used to. There's a learning curve a bit. Hopefully, this talk will help you with that learning curve somewhat, so you can understand it. There are some confusing error messages sometimes, and I think once you get started, you don't know what they mean. I'll show you some of those things, but hey, once you understand what they are, that takes some time, but then you can easily go in and fix them. And the last point I'm going to say is that there's some configuration options. And this might be confusing if you say, like, you might be one of those types that like to configure things and get down into it. But if you are getting started and maybe you get a little bit lazy or you get a little frustrated, you can kind of go around TypeScript or go around the type checker. And then at that point, you're just kind of wasting your time on writing TypeScript if you're not actually using the type checker or being cognizant or checking those things with the type. So I say that it's not so great because sometimes people can just not necessarily cheat, but kind of go around it, but also pretend to write TypeScript, which is a weird thing to do. So, and lastly, the not so great thing, which is the most frustrating thing for all developers, is this red squiggly line. I'm going to show this red squiggly line a lot in this talk because this is exactly what you're going to get when you have errors. And maybe this brings you back to school or something, or spell check or whatnot, where it's very frustrating to see these things and know there's a problem. But know that the benefits of TypeScript, at least at the beginning, is doing stuff wrong so you can do stuff right way quicker. So that's I think out of to that. So cool. I don't know what it says when I'm getting wrong. So yeah, we'll talk about some error messages now, but I don't think I will go into I won't go into all of them. I'll show a couple of them that I think are frustrating for getting started with. But that's a really good point, right? You don't know where to fix things. There's this keyword that I'm not going to talk about in today's talk, but there's this keyword, a secret for all beginners called any. which you kind of again get around with all these things. But hey, that's a part of what we're here to do, is to learn. So let's actually set up our TypeScript environment. I hope everyone's still with us and ready to continue on. So I'm going to walk through this this Microsoft Learn tutorial here. So if you are joining and you want to watch the stream, which is completely fine, then you don't have to. You can go back to this as a reference. So it's just aka.ms getting started with TypeScript 1. So do feel free to check that out after you watch this video or watch the stream, because this will kind of walk you through exactly the commands that I'm going to run later on. But and a good reference for you once you get started. So the first thing we'll do is actually install TypeScript. So this again is good that you have some JavaScript knowledge, because if you don't know what npm install is, it's going to be very tricky for you. But first we'll install TypeScript. I am not crazy, and I have already installed TypeScript. I'm not going to run a stream and I haven't done it. But you can do this easily in your terminal. It's just npm install TypeScript and G, which is this thing for the global. So it's all going to be, you can do this per project, or you can just install it in your computer. And if you do, I got this access arrow because of where I'm at, but also you can run this as your administrator for using the sudo keyword. And that's all in the Microsoft Learn thing. So next thing we'll do is actually confirm TypeScript. So yes, you can also install locally. You can install it per project or global. It's either one. I write many TypeScript projects, so it's just much easier to do that globally. Perfect. So if I want to actually confirm this, I can clear this. I can do TCS version, and that always gives you the version that you have installed. I'm not sure what I'm assuming this is the latest version, but if you see something different, that's okay. You just have a version of TypeScript, and most of the latest versions all running on the same spec, if you will, the same thing for documentation wise. But if you do have some really older version, you should probably try to upgrade that. So we've got that installed, and now we actually want to first create a TypeScript config file. And you can either create a TypeScript file first, like an actual, let's say, app.ts, or you can create a config file. But I'll make a config file, or I think I actually already have one here. But it's just tcs/init is to make a config file. And we'll actually walk through what is actually installed here, or what we have made in the config here. So this will make this tsconfig JSON file, which you see there. And there's a few important parts that I want to kind of highlight. There's 3 things, and no worries if you haven't installed this, Addy. I just showed you the link. So watch along, and then go to the Microsoft Learn, and you can figure out how to do all of these things there. So TypeScript config file, I think there's 3 kind of important parts. There's many things in there, but there's this thing around strict, target, the out file, and out directory, or out dir. So first one is the target. So this is actually, they have these lovely comments. It's setting actually the language version of what you're working with in JavaScript. So I think the default is ES 2016. I personally like to just change this to ES6. It's up to you. And I get some suggestions, which is nice, and I can save that. The other parts, let's see here. So the target is one you probably want to change. This is strict. So again, I'm talking about the configuration options. You could turn this off, and basically what this means is that it doesn't actually do any of the type checking. So any of what we're going to talk about later, like these squiggly lines and telling you you've made something else, this actually makes that a little bit less strict, as it says, a little bit less pertinent. So I would hesitate to say change this. You should definitely try to keep that. Again, that's going to give you the value of actually TypeScript and working with that. So those are some of the bigger ones. These out files, and to change any of these things, you can just go in and uncomment them. When I'm working with an actual production project or a project that I'm going to commit to GitHub, these out file and out directory are important because these are where your files will go. So if you want to specify like where the source file is, which is the JavaScript file, and the directory, which is where your source code will be at, these can all be set to there. And these are now right now this the root directory. So anytime I'm actually going to compile a file, it just gets dropped in here. But most of the time, this gets changed to like source and directory. So this is just up to you for your project setup. But those are probably as a beginner or getting started with TypeScript, the three things you probably want to change. Anything else, I'll probably leave alone at the moment until you get comfortable and understand what they do. And like I said, they have all these nice, lovely comments to get you understanding of what's happening. So now we're actually ready to write some TypeScript. If you wanted to follow along and you don't have anything installed, to the earlier point, you can go to www.typescriptlang.org/play, and it's actually a TypeScript playground, which in fact has everything kind of pre-installed for you. And it's not an IDE, what kind of looks like VS Code. And again, that's another nice place if you wanted to like get used to TypeScript and you don't or not working with an IDE at the moment. And it saves some time from that setup perspective too. So let's write some TypeScript. We got this set up, or maybe we don't have it set up and you're going to set it up later. But if you have you're with me here, now we're actually going to write some TypeScript here just to show you some of the syntax. So we're going to declare some different variables and work with the different types that I mentioned that are kind of both JavaScript types as well as the unique types in TypeScript. And if you want to learn how to declare variable types, this is the next sort of Microsoft Learn, which is again a free platform that you have, the free course. You can go in there and it will give you a little bit more descriptions on text, because I know some people like to watch videos, some people like to documentation and text. So that's the next kind of module there. And again, this will be a good reference for you as if you can't follow along at home at the moment. Don't stress. This is where you can go for that. So first thing we'll do is actually like declare a variable in TypeScript just to give you an understanding of what's going on. So this is the syntax. So normally it's like a let, var, const, whatever. The variable name, the type. So we need to declare. Again, this is how we know exactly what we want the type to be or what we expect, and then the actual value. So I have here at the below, let's say we want to make a value or a variable called Twitter name. That's going to be a string. And then if you will put someone's Twitter handle like @Korey Space. So follow me if you want. That's my Twitter handle. And we can go ahead and do that in the first lines here. So this is exactly what we were expecting. So we have the Twitter name. And then if I go in and hover over this, it gives me this actually declaration, which is the string. So what you notice here is I don't actually have this declared as a string. So, or I don't have this like semicolon string. And this is actually what we call in TypeScript called type inference. And I think I have a slide for that. But this is actually showing what, instead of having to declare this every single time, like, let username string and then putting the string. TypeScript already is kind of smart with these sorts of things, and this also works with like numbers, for example. So it can infer or kind of understand based on the actual value what that type is. So you don't actually need to do this. This would be to the point of like writing too much code or writing so much code. You don't need to do this every single time to do that. I'll show you exactly when you need to do that, especially when you're working with different functions and stuff like that. But this is actually like our first line of TypeScript. So if you're following along, you can actually go ahead and compile this. So I can save that. And the way we compile our TypeScript code is basically using two different methods. We can use this TSC, which is TypeScript compiler, just in case you wanted to know what that was, and the actual file name. Or we can put this in watcher mode, which is basically essentially every time we save a file or make changes to the file, it will compile the code. And again, the advantage of doing the compile is that we get the errors or the the problems with the file or how we're managing our types right then and there, and we don't need to like go in and launch an application or something like that. So I'll show you two different methods. So TSC, what was this first line? TS, that can go ahead and compile. And if you've done this for the first time, this will also create a JavaScript file. So this will be less exciting for this file. But now you can see that while this is my TypeScript file, this has compiled or created a JavaScript file. And anytime you do this in TypeScript, this is the same thing. You will actually have your JavaScript code right then and there as well. So again, the debate of this is a new programming language or whatnot, I think it's just a very new or different way to write JavaScript in a more precise way. So that's again your first line of TypeScript done. So congratulations, everyone, if this is the first time you've written TypeScript. You can also put this in the watcher mode, TSC-W, and now it's going to watch anything there that I have for these sorts of things anytime I save it. So let's say I want to make this a string, yeah, and then I have, let's say, 5, our first squiggly line. So what is this saying? Well, this is saying type number, so this 5, it's not assignable to type string. So again, if I were to save this as well, it's going to give me the line. And again, we're working with one line of code here. But then you have the line, the error exactly where you need it to be. So again, TypeScript can kind of detect these things. And again, you're getting this all within your IDE because of that. So some questions I see in there. So now that we've gotten that done, do we use TypeScript with React? And the answer is yes. You can. We're actually going to do another session or workshop which specifically working with React, but there's nothing stopping you writing this with Angular or React. This is JavaScript. And there's another different file name called TSX that you can do, which I think, yeah, see, Jasmine, thank you, beating me to the answer. TSX files, which is very similar to your JSX files, so similar thing like that. So we will also go into that more in detail on that session. So this won't be a JavaScript session, but know that you can also write TypeScript with JavaScript, TypeScript with React code. So you're not wasting your time here. And good point. So notice I saw this turn let into var, and that's a really good point. So if you see here, I have let Twitter name, and then I have oh, now I actually have let because I before I had var, and sorry, Splatbang, I didn't want to make you a liar here, but before this was var, because before I actually had this in a different compiler. This is my target, which is ES 2016, if you remember. So that was actually compiling in 2016 code, which var was still kind of used. But now that I've switched it over to ES6, this is actually going to keep this into let. So that's why I also like to change the target, because then it's more likely what the JavaScript code that I would be writing if I was just writing vanilla JavaScript. But very good point and good eye on detail. And this also, if I change something here, then it also makes the changes there when I do sorts of things like that. So that's our first squiggly line. And again, if I wanted to change this to no squiggly lines, I could not keep it. I can remove it because now look, TypeScript knows number, but I can also declare this as number. But in the real world, you wouldn't be also showing that all this like for just defining variables, because TypeScript can infer that. So that's the first sort of thing in compiling our code and defining variables. The next thing we want to do is actually write some functions. So we can have function, the typical syntax is like function, the name of the function, the parameters that we want to pass that function, and the type. And then we want to actually, then if you want to return something, print something, it will be much the same way. And I can show you as well, if you want to expect to what to return or expect to receive, we can change that within the syntax as well. So let's look at our functions that we have. And now everything on my I put it as all my code is now compiled into JavaScript, which is nice. So first thing, let's see this doing a function in TypeScript. So we have this function add viewers. So we're doing this on YouTube, so we all want to add viewers. And now we're passing in a parameter, which is viewers. Now we're going to set that type or expect that type, for example, to be a number. So then we want to return viewers, and let's say we really want to get a lot of viewers. So we're going to multiply that by 2 every time we have that. And then we can pass in a value 2. That's going to result into 4, right? Because of taking the viewers. Now, let's say I didn't know this was a number, or I'm working with this in somewhere else, and I want to like do something crazy, like let's call a method on this, and I want to see the actual length of that function. So immediately you'll see a couple of things going on, a few red lines. I'm going to first start with this one. It says right here, so viewers, I have the viewers, I haven't changed anything. Viewers a number, viewers, and I want to do a dot length on that. And can anyone tell me why it's dot length does not work on this number? I'm gonna give it some time. I see a question here. It's a very specific question, and I'm not even sure if I can answer this. But so let me know why I can't do dot length, and I'm gonna answer this one here. Why is it always shown error TypeScript, but is accepted off script? Why is that? I don't know. I'll actually have to look exactly on that code. I haven't worked with like Excel script workbook before. So we have a couple answers. Thanks, guys. So it's not a string, it's not an array, and it's not an array. So it's basically, you're all right. It's basically not something that can be called a method that can be called on a number. So, if I'm getting started on this and TypeScript, maybe I get very frustrated and say, you know what? Let's just do a string then. Like, okay, viewers can be a string. Let's say I'm just scraping this from YouTube, and I don't know what YouTube is showing this displayed as, so I'm just getting the value and let's just store it as a string. Sadly, I still have this red squiggly line. Didn't fix it. So good answers, everyone, but you haven't solved my problem. Oh, now actually, you know what? You have solved my problem, but now I have a new problem, which is this. The expression is not callable. And this is, I think, one of the number one errors that you'll see that is very confusing for TypeScript. And I'll give you 2 times bonus points if anyone can tell me now what this means or why this is not working. Or why do I still have this red squiggly line? And it's not a spelling error, but something in TypeScript that is saying, you know what, this length is not working. We've turned it to a string. We could turn it to an array as well if we wanted to, but what is this expression is not callable? And I can feel people Googling on this. So hopefully you get a good answer quickly, or use ChatGPT or something to find why this dot length is not working for me. Dot length is a string method, Latif says. This is a string, so I made it to a string, so that should be fine. Reference variable, I think that's okay. Let's see, Lao, yeah. That looks okay. The variable's fine, and so some good guesses. It's actually this. It's because I'm actually calling this. You see this here as a function. So this expression is not callable. This expression is not a function length. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you, Fairy Animal. You got it. Length is not a function, though. Good point. So that's a double point for Fairy Animal. It's actually because of this, right? So now I have it, and length is just the method or using that. It's not an actual function. So removing the parentheses there. And maybe you wouldn't see that. Maybe if I actually run that in JavaScript, it wouldn't give me an error. But again, this is saving me a lot of time, a lot of headache on finding out what is going on there. So that's some functions there, some fun with functions to get you started. There's also, we can also do things like expecting the return type. which is sort of important, especially when we're making calls to certain things. So here we have not only saying or expecting the setting viewers to number, but then in this syntax, it's saying whatever we return should be also a number. So if I go here to viewers, you can see number there. And then if I pass it to, again, that'll be fine. But if I, let's say, do something really crazy, let's say a string instead, this is going to flag an error because the assignable parameter what I'm passing into it, it's not assignable, it's not a string, but it should be a number. And I can easily fix that. So again, some simple examples, but just to give you some understanding of like why we have this type checker, some benefits there, and again, it's saving us some time when we are launching these things, or compiling our application, and like, oh, why is this not working? Well, maybe it's because you're not managing the types. Okay. And then this kind of up the ante here. We also have a few other examples. So the functions, like we can pass multiple variables in there, like we would normally do in JavaScript. And then these are also shown, like the email first time is a Boolean. And then making sure that these are also fine. So these are, again, if I would not put this in there, I would get like an error because of that. So again, making sure that you're passing in the right errors and showing what you're expecting. Are numbers in TypeScript just numbers? And that is right, yeah. So this numbers. There's no, and that's so it's unique to both the JavaScript as well as TypeScript. So these could be anything from there. There's no like floats that you might get into with other languages. Great question. So, we can look at other functions, and we'll look at that maybe in another session. But that's functions for you. The next one is arrays, which was something that was brought up in the last example. Like, how do we work with the arrays or things like that? And the syntax is very similar. So we have const array name. We can do it in two different ways. We can do the type. So again, if you want to just have array of certain type, or like let's say array of a string of array of strings, sorry. And then we also have this brackets as well, which is array and type. That's more in time to what we call generics, which is something we'll cover in more depth session, or like the next session for working with TypeScript. But just to know if you see that, that's going on there. So if I go to my arrays now, I can see my array of view usernames, and I wish I was like smart and I could put it like all your usernames now here really quickly. But now I have this string, and this is saying that expect this to be every element or every part of these things is actually a string within those things. So if I wanted to, within this array, which is view usernames, so I can add a username like so, and that's okay, right? That's a string. But let's say I want to do something a little crazy, and then now I have a number that I need to push in there because I don't know, someone's username is just a number, but I don't make that or convert that into a string. I get an error here because appends new elements. I need to return. I need to actually, if I want to push this, it actually needs to be a string. So the argument type number is not assignable. It's not assignable to this username, view username, this array. I'll talk about if you want to mix those things. So like in some arrays that you work with, you don't have all numbers. It's not a perfect world that we work in. But again, for now, when you're defining these arrays, it should be the expected type or the type, and then you can define that. And if you push some things, it should also be that type. So that's arrays. And that's this other syntax is just showing you the same thing. Tuples. So tuples is like, I think if anyone's a Python developer here, I know tuples from Python, but tuples are familiar elements in other languages, but not built into the core JavaScript language. But I would like to say that tuples is like the stricter cousin of arrays, if you will. And the reason of that, because tuples essentially allow us to be a lot more strict on what we can actually put into the array. So I can have this let viewer data. So let's say I want to have viewer data here, and then a string, a number, and a Boolean. in that order. That's basically what tuples is saying. It has to be in this order. And it's really, I think, a good use case for when you're working with, let's say, APIs, for example, and you want to make sure when you're communicating with the API or sending that information, it's in the correct order that you should send that in to not have any errors or issues. So I can add now. I can have set this viewer data to this, and I can also show the certain types there. And again, so now if I wanted to hover over this in my IDE, let's say I didn't know this is like line 1, and this is we're on line 100, and I set viewer data. I need to set it to something or assign it the values. I can easily hover over this and say, oh yeah, this is string number boolean. That's what it is. And if I was using in regular vanilla JavaScript, I could get away with this without actually not doing these things, but that could cause some issues later down the line. Cool. Some questions. So is there a limit to the amount of items you can have in a tuple? I do not know if there's a limit. I don't think there is. It's really up to you. Obviously, it limits the amount of memory and efficiency of your code, but there's no limit that I know of. And what is the use of tuples than array? Which is also a very, very good question. So in this case, tuples offer us strictness around the order of things. So if I need to sort this or read this information or send this information off to, let's say, the backend or an application or an API, it might be important for that order to be maintained. Or if I want to display that to a user in some way. So tuples are strict in this way. So I can't come in here and then say, green as the number, because TypeScript is going to say this is not a number, and I expect a number. Again, managing expectations. TypeScript in the middle, which I wish I called this workshop, is what we're trying to do here, right? So if I change that back to a number, that is that. So arrays allow flexibility. It doesn't have to be in the order, in a particular order, or tuples it does. So that's one thing. And there's some weird things about tuples. So I can actually like push this into I see how I don't get an error here. So one of the weird things is I can push some new element into them, and then even though it doesn't respect this order, if I were to print this viewer data tuple, it would also have that included there. So some strange things. TypeScript's not perfect, but that's one of the things there. So why not tuples and why not objects? So that's a good point. I'm going to go into objects now, and you'll see some of the differences, because objects also allow us to assign different variables based on that object or read them in different ways. So it again gives you a lot more flexibility and operations you can do in objects that you can't really do in tuples, I would say, is one of the more important parts of it. So I think objects is next. Yeah, objects. So objects. So again, syntax wise, the object is the name of the object, name, the type. Again, if you want to add multiple parameters to that object, so you have name, type, and that's essentially kind of it. It was really kind of using the very similar syntax that we have to defining variables in TypeScript. So where did my files go? If I go into my objects file now, my TypeScript. So simple object that we can make here, just to show you what that looks like, is I want to, let's say, create a viewer of this lovely workshop. I can create a viewer, and then let's say I want to have a viewer name. We also have this as a string, viewer email being a string, and let's say I want to also track if this is the first time that you're watching or joining us on this channel. So this is also Boolean, true or false. And so I can go ahead and set this up. I can go ahead and also, like I would do in a JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, go in, say viewer.info.viewer name. But what's really nice is not what you can see. I can go into viewer.info or viewer info. I can hover over that, and I can see, all right, so viewer name is a string, viewer email is a string, first time is a Boolean. So if I want to make the operations, I can go in and do that. And I can also assign a new object within that. So create a new viewer, set that up to me, my email. I wish I had Korey.com as an email, and the first time being true. So this is, again, setting that up. And then I can go in and say, oh, okay, this should be a string. This should be a string. and this should be a Boolean. So again, give you some more insights there. And this is all again being compiled into TypeScript, JavaScript. Um, well, not because it's commented, but you can see all the JavaScript code here. So again, some of the times your JavaScript code is shorter than your TypeScript code, but we're not. The competition is not on the length of code, but the quality of your code. So really nice, clean way up seeing the differences between TypeScript and JavaScript as well. I have some bad examples here just to show you. So let's see, uncomment this out. And I can go in, and if I create viewer, that's going to give me one because I'm just duplicate of implementing this. But then I have this viewer.favorite streamer. And if you remember, we didn't set that in. I'm back. StreamYard crashed. Here we are. Let's see. Let me get. So so I love it. I'm glad you're still here. The viewer, we're talking about objects, so creating viewers. So I was making a new object here, create viewer, and then I said, oh, I want to also say like, who's your favorite streamer, and have this viewer.info, a viewer favorite streamer. This isn't a property. This isn't something that we create in the object. And in times of working with vanilla JavaScript, this would just go as undefined, and we get these really annoying errors on exactly where that is, and I need to find it, or console.log view favorite streamer. But right here, I can easily see that this does not exist as a property or a type within the viewer info. So again, saving a lot of time, a lot of headache on trying to debug certain things. So that's objects. We have unions. Yeah, that's a good question. So why is this all these semicolons? So I have Prettier working, and it's also putting all of these things in head. And I think also GitHub Copilot adds those as well. But yeah, they're completely legal. Do not report me to the JavaScript police. I don't want to go there right now. So so we have unions, and then these also, like the name sort of describes, allows us to combine certain elements. So I have this union here, which is let viewer count. And let's say I'm not really sure if this is going to be a number or a string. So I can put this little straight line here to make it a union. And it basically says it could be a number or it could be a string. And let's say we can equal to 100. But let's say later on the code, or we scrape something on the website, then it turns into a string out of nowhere. Who knows why? Someone changed something. Now it's okay, right? If I didn't have this union and I said this had to be a string, then I would TypeScript would give me this error and say, guess what? You need to have this a number, for example. And unions are really helpful, especially when we're talking about doing arrays as well. So in this case, I have these viewer IDs. Let's say everyone has an ID of within viewing this. I can make a union of these and say this array would also be the string and number. So I can have some strings here. I can also have some numbers. And this is completely okay because we've used a union of strings and numbers. So again, very useful for doing something like this. And then we can also do things like variable locking. I'm not sure if that's the official term of this, but I'm going to call it that, where I can do something like this. let viewer review be amazing, good, or okay, because we don't want any negativity here from reviewing our streams. So I can go in, I could say, yeah, viewer review is amazing because I basically only have these three options to assign it. And this could be very useful again if you're like working with some, let's say banking, or maybe you're booking a flight. I seen that as an example, and you only want to have like three different kinds of seats or three different kind of colors or something. You can make this variable locked. So again, you don't necessarily, if someone goes in the code later on and tries to do something like this, where it's like, actually, you know what, the viewer review was terrible. Well, guess what? That's not going to be assignable because the only assignable types are amazing, good, and okay. So that is another way to sort of do these things to make it a lot easier with working with unions. And I love this JS Cops. That is going to be one of the top reality shows of 2023. That's going to be great. I love all of these things, including all these pop culture references within this presentation. Cool. So that's unions, and that's something very unique to TypeScript. And the last two, I think, are going to be the most important ones for working with TypeScript, and that's type aliases as well as interfaces. So let's look at type aliases first. And type aliases essentially allows us to make our own types in a way that we go into sort of things like this, where I can make a type viewer, and then I can go in and say viewer name is, let's say, string, email, view count is a number, and is subscribed is a Boolean. So that now that is a type within my application of TypeScript. So then I can go in and say function create new viewer. Viewer is going to be a viewer, and then I can do something with that. And I can go into the type now, and this built into the type itself, and I can see what I can call or what I can use within that. So viewer name, email, string, view count, and I can set these, read these sorts of things, and now I can use this throughout my entire application. Oh yeah, I love these. I saw these things. Is this a cat? Is this a child? It is a child. Good on everyone. Apologies for any of the background noises, but that's life. One of the things we could do is also do a type and extend these sorts of things. So if I wanted to go ahead and do a type superfan, so it's going to inherit the type here, viewer, but so it's going to have all these things: viewer name, email, string, number, is subscribed. But let's say I want to make this a super fan as well, and this is going to be true or false. So it inherits all of these things, these types, and then extends what is super fan. So it's another great way to sort of make it a way to make your code very efficient in working with different types. And that is, again, a big part of working with TypeScript is the type aliases. So it's good to understand these sorts of things and what you can do and you can't do. And lastly is interfaces. The syntax, as you see here, is the interface name, and variable type. And I know we'll get this question, like, what's the difference between types and interfaces? And I will tell you, don't worry. But let's look at, let's see here, the actual variable types or interfaces, which is, let's say I wanted to make the viewer again. I can go ahead and export viewer, make this an interface. And an interface, I like this idea of using it as an interface because this is kind of how like users how as a developer or you would interact with this sorts of things. I can make a viewer name like we did before. I can do email, and I can do this in types as well. I forgot to mention this, but I can put this question mark, which basically means it's optional. So if I wanted to, let's say I can't collect viewers' emails or something like that, then I can go ahead and put this as a question mark. And if I wanted to make a new viewer, so let's say here I made this recent viewer, I can do that and not necessarily need or required to have an email. So I can do that, and then I can also go in and set all these other values. But you see we have this red squiggly line now because I said that, oh, it's super fan. I want to add that, but that's not in the actual interface for viewer. So that's going to go ahead and tell me that this is not assignable type to viewer. And then either add this to the interface viewer, or I can remove it out there. But this, you might be looking and say, this is very similar to what you just showed us with types. Like, it doesn't look too different. And that's correct. You can kind of use these interchangeably. Like, they aren't fighting each other. Like, you can be free to use these sort of things. But the key difference between types and interfaces is that you can actually what we call open an interface, or add something basically to an interface. So let's say a dude would want to work with isSuperFan. What I can do is basically open this interface, export interface viewer, and then isSuperFan Boolean. And now you see that my red squiggly line is gone because now I have added this, or opened the interface and added this into that. And like JavaScript, I know maybe this is weird for some people, but also you can also then have this included whatever line you have there. So some questions, let's see. Wayne Jones says, can interfaces be extended? I believe so. Definitely types can be extended, and I believe I need to check the documentation, but I believe also interfaces can be extended, so you could have an interface of an interface. So extending is the same thing. And then line 12 would be illegal, so you need a comma there. Where's my line 12? Yeah. All right, we'll have a comma now. If I save it in prettier, we'll save the day, so I don't need to do that. So that's all good for that. Perfect. So these are like the core of learning TypeScript. The types, we reviewed some of the types that are akin or very similar to JavaScript that you're working with, and then the new types in there. So hopefully it didn't scare you away, and hopefully you do want to learn more TypeScript. We have a few sessions coming up in the future, which is however you found this session, it's posted in our meetup groups as well as on the Microsoft Reactor page. So one will be building your first TypeScript project. So we'll actually get more into in depth of like actually working with different functions, types as it relates to actually building something, an application. In this case, we're going to use actually an external API and make a request and get that information and show it to the user. The other session that we're going to do is creating TypeScript apps with React and Node. Again, the syntax might be different as far as working with like TSX files and Node, but at the base layer, TypeScript is core. It's writing JavaScript, so it won't be too different. But just know, especially when you're working with different components on the React side, how to work with React and TypeScript is different. So we're going to go into in depth on that. So that's going to be on the 15th. There'll be other sessions coming up on TypeScript as well. So deploying your TypeScript app. So actually getting this out, and that won't be unique to TypeScript, but hey, it's fun to actually, when you build an application, how to deploy it and get it out there. And then also getting better at TypeScript will be a little bit more of an advanced session to this. There's things I left out, certain keywords that make it more efficient to write TypeScript. Like I said, I didn't talk about that secret word, which is any. So I'll talk about that. Also, some things about union narrowing, because remember when we're talking about unions, we can say either or, and that causes some problems if you start working with different operations. So we'll also talk about union narrowing as another way to get better at writing TypeScript and getting rid of that error, those squiggly lines that can be annoying. So I'll leave you with these things. Thanks everybody for joining and participating and asking questions. These two things are good references, like I said. So if you go to getting started with TypeScript 1, that's going to help you get set up with setting up your environment for TypeScript. And then the getting started with TypeScript 2 is actually setting up some of the variables. I think it actually does talk about any, if I remember, so you'll get a little head start on some of the things that I left out. But thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for a great TypeScript session. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can find me on Twitter at Korey Space, or leave a comment in the video, like the video, things like that. I will always kind of monitor the comments on there as well. If you start working with TypeScript and you get some errors, I'm happy to help. But thanks, everyone. Goodbye.